Before you fall asleep tonight, remember this. Some people believe the scariest monsters hide in dark forests, abandoned houses, or lonely roads. They're wrong. The most terrifying things are the ones that seem completely normal, until it's too late. Tonight, you'll hear 5 terrifying, true-style horror stories. A rideshare driver who picked up a passenger that shouldn't have existed.
A night security guard who discovered something moving inside an empty building.
A family who kept hearing footsteps from a room nobody used. A hiker who got lost and found something impossible in the woods. And a man who received phone calls from his own number. Turn off the lights if you dare. Because these stories might make you think twice before being alone.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a collection of truly chilling narratives that explore various supernatural and suspenseful encounters involving isolated individuals facing the absolute unknown. We're talking about everything from a rideshare driver picking up a ghost, to a security guard hunted by a malevolent shadow, all the way to prophetic phone calls from someone's own voice. You see, we often seek out moments of solitude to recharge, right? We assume that being alone means we're safe from the chaos of the outside world. But what if that isolation is exactly what leaves us the most vulnerable? We're going to map out how isolation escalates across a few distinct environments and discover how fear really takes root when we think no one else is around. So I have to ask, are you ever truly alone? I want you to really consider your own vulnerability for a second. Think about the last time you were the only person in a room, or walking down an empty street, or just driving your car late at night. You felt isolated, sure, but did you actually feel safe? The accounts we're unpacking today are going to challenge that exact feeling of safety and completely deconstruct the illusion of solitude. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, The Night Shift. Terror in transitional spaces. We often think of our cars or empty office corridors as these safe transitional spaces, places where we're just passing through. But what happens when they aren't? Our first account takes us to October 2024, deep in rural Ohio. It's 1:30 in the morning. Picture Jake, a rideshare driver who normally deals with completely mundane routes, but his app directs him to this highly unusual, extremely isolated pickup location, a dark, empty road right next to an old cemetery. Despite the heavy fog and literally zero people around, he accepts the fare. And there, standing by the road, is a woman in a long gray coat. Her face is totally obscured by her hair, and she gets into the back seat without making a single sound. 30 minutes. Just imagine 30 agonizing minutes driving through thick fog in complete, suffocating silence. Jake tries to make some basic conversation, asking, "Heading home?" Absolutely nothing. Crickets. And as the miles tick by, the inside of his vehicle becomes unnaturally freezing cold, like completely ignoring the car's heater. The tension in that confined little space is just building to a breaking point. So halfway through this freezing drive, Jake glances up into his rearview mirror. The back seat is entirely empty. He slams on the brakes in the middle of nowhere. He never heard a door open. The absolute physical impossibility of it just freezes him in his seat. He frantically searches the dark roadside and finds absolutely nothing. But then, his phone chimes. The rideshare app is still active, and it's showing the passenger's digital PIN right inside his vehicle. Jake slowly turns around to inspect the back of his car. He doesn't find the woman, but instead, he finds wet footprints leading straight across the back seat, trailing directly toward his closed trunk. He speeds to a gas station, cancels the ride, and the account just vanishes from his phone. But the true horror drops the next day. Jake actually goes back to the pickup spot and talks to an elderly worker nearby. The worker points to a gravestone that has the exact photo of the woman in the gray coat. She had died in a horrific car crash on that exact stretch of road, exactly 3 years prior. The threat wasn't outside in the dark. The ghost had manifested right inside his moving vehicle. Now, let's look at how this kind of threat takes on a different form, this time inside an empty 12-story office building in Chicago. Marcus is a night shift security guard, and he is completely alone. At 2:17 a.m., he catches this glitchy movement on camera 8. 10 minutes later, at 2:27, a tall, thin, motionless figure clearly appears in the hallway on the monitor. Marcus goes up to investigate, but he finds an entirely empty floor. But at exactly 2:30 a.m., just as he turns to leave, slow, heavy footsteps start echoing right behind him. Marcus freezes. The footsteps stop. Suddenly, his security radio crackles to life. But it's not the dispatch operator. It's a whisper. But honestly, the true horror was revealed when they reviewed the security footage the next morning. No physical person was ever chasing Marcus down that hallway. Nope. Instead, the footage showed that a malevolent, elongated shadow was attached to Marcus himself. It was anchored to him, following him down every single corridor, just waiting. The utter isolation in that empty building made him the absolute perfect host for something completely unnatural. Let's move on to Section 2, Invading Your Sanctuary. Nowhere is safe. So what happens when isolation is breached in the one place you are supposed to be completely secure? Your own home. In this old Vermont farmhouse, the isolation was breached slowly. Week 1 was perfectly normal, but by week 2, deliberate footsteps began echoing from the attic right at 3 a.m. The family brushes it off, assuming it's just raccoons or mice, a totally common rationalization. But weeks later, the sounds dramatically escalate. We're talking going from light footsteps to the heavy, scraping sound of furniture being dragged across the floorboards right above their heads while they sleep. Sarah wakes up her husband, Tom. He grabs a flashlight and climbs the pull-down stairs up into the pitch-black attic. Sarah waits below. Minutes pass in this agonizing, heavy silence. She calls out his name. Nothing. Finally, his voice drifts down, but it sounds completely wrong. He says, "Sarah, there's someone up here." It is literally the absolute worst fear of any homeowner, realized in a single terrifying sentence. The police rush over and sweep the attic. While the intruders somehow managed to slip away, they left behind some horrifying evidence: food wrappers, blankets, old clothing arranged into a makeshift bed. An unseen stranger had been secretly living just feet above this family for months, completely undetected. Naturally, the family evacuated immediately, but here is the most unsettling detail. The person was never caught, and neighbors later reported seeing a figure standing silently in the tree line, just watching the empty house for weeks. The sanctity of their isolation was completely shattered. Which brings us to Section 3, Nowhere to Hide, the ultimate isolation. We're transitioning now into ultimate isolation, deep in the wilderness, where you are entirely removed from society. Ethan, a lost hiker, stumbles upon an abandoned cabin out in Washington state. It's totally derelict, full of rotting wood and thick layers of dust. But inside, there is this terrifying anomaly, a single chair sitting right in the middle of the room. It's been recently used with absolutely no dust on it whatsoever. It's a subtle but massive red flag that he is definitely not alone out there. Midnight rolls around. Ethan is trapped by the freezing elements outside. Suddenly, 3 knocks hit the door, then 3 more. A woman starts crying outside, begging, "Please let me in." Ethan inches toward the door, but his gut instincts are screaming at him to stop. He peeks through a crack in the rotting wood. The woman standing out there in the freezing cold is just staring forward, smiling. She isn't blinking, she isn't breathing. And worst of all, while the crying sounds continue to echo all around the cabin, her mouth is completely motionless. Ethan backs away as the knocking turns incredibly violent, literally shaking the entire structure before plunging right back into dead silence. He survived the night, only to learn later that hikers have been reporting this exact motionless, mimicked entity in those woods for decades. That mimicking behavior perfectly sets up our final incredible case, with a man named Daniel. It started weirdly enough with a call from his own phone number, just silent static on the line. The next night, he gets a call from his own number again, but this time it's slow, uneven breathing. A week later, he answers, and he hears an exact, perfect replica of his own voice on the other end of the line. Through the phone, Daniel's own voice whispers a chilling warning: "Don't go downstairs." He freezes. A second later, a massive, violent crash erupts from his basement. He immediately calls the cops, who discover that an intruder had just smashed through the basement window. His own voice had paradoxically warned him of a very real physical threat. Terrified out of his mind, Daniel completely uproots his life. He moves to a new apartment, he changes his phone number, he does literally everything right to sever the connection. And for 1 full year, there is total peace. He thinks the nightmare is finally over. But then, exactly a year later, his phone rings at midnight. It's an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answers it. The voice is back. It's his voice. And it simply says, "You should have listened the first time." The line goes dead, disconnecting forever, leaving Daniel in a state of permanent psychological terror every single time a phone rings in the dark. And that brings us to Section 4, the unseen threat, lingering in the shadows. So whether it's a ghost in the back seat, a shadow in an empty hallway, a stranger in the attic, an entity in the woods, or even prophetic, threatening calls from your own voice, all of these narratives prey on our core assumption of solitude. They prove that isolation doesn't always mean emptiness. Sometimes it just means you are finally quiet enough to notice what has been there all along. So which of these accounts scared you the most? Was it the physical violation of the home or the supernatural stalking out in public spaces? Engage with this concept, because really understanding what scares us helps us understand our own psychological boundaries. Because at the end of the day, we have to accept a highly uncomfortable truth. We lock our doors, we seek out quiet places, and we try to keep the darkness out. But as these stories clearly show, sometimes the scariest things aren't hiding out in the dark at all. Sometimes they're already standing right beside you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. If isolation is just an illusion, who or what is keeping you company right now?